Ken was the Consul-General in New York more than 20 years ago, and soon after his arrival, much to his surprise, one imagines, he had to deal with the impact of 9/11 on New York. So we're very pleased that he's given us some time today, because we see this as part of the continuing history, the real lived history of a very important event for Australia and the world. And Ken was right at the centre of it as far as Australia was concerned. So Ken, what do you remember about that day? Do you remember where you were? That's the typical question. Where were you when you first heard about the first plane flying into the tower?
Good morning, Nick. No, I was sitting probably exactly where you are now when I heard that a plane had come into the tower. And you were perfectly right. I've been in New York for just over 2 weeks, and I'd gone to the US Open, and the night before September 11 in the consulate, I presented the US Open Cup to Leighton Hewitt. I've been to the Huggy Bears and played tennis with Fred Stolle, and I thought, this is my life. And I was looking as happy as you are now. And the next moment, one of the staff members came in and said, there's been an accident downtown, Ken. Come around, we can look right down Lexington Avenue. And I walked around to Lexington Avenue to that office, and the second plane came in. So I actually saw the second plane came in, which was, it's a moment that when I think about it now, it still makes me very emotional, possibly more anger now or subdued anger than there was there at that time. But we knew at that time that it was not an accident. This was something serious. And we came back to the office, and my very dear friend, John Douth, who was the ambassador to the United Nations, came into the office, and we sort of decided at that point in time what the plan should be. And that was primarily to, in the first instance, to look after our own staff, and then to reach out into the community to see what we needed to do to help. And I must say that the embassy and the consulate and our friends in Washington, and as you know, John Howard was in Washington at that time.
Yep.
We all got together to formulate a plan to see what could be done in these very miserable circumstances.
Do you have a recollection of how the rest of the consulate reacted? Was there amazement, wonder? Just what was the reaction as best you can recall?
Actually, it was dismay and loneliness, actually. The loneliness aspect of all of that was the thing that most, not concerned, I guess, but I can't find a word for it, that impacted on me, I think is the right way. And that's why Jill at that time cleaned all the furniture out of the residence and said to all the mothers with young babies there, come in and there's Vegemite sandwiches here for you. And we had pushers lined up all the way along Beekman Place as people came to get support. They felt very, very vulnerable and very alone. The wives with young babies, husbands away, young people who'd come to New York to better their careers. And all of a sudden, was deathly silence in New York. A horrible smell, planes flying above. It was out of a movie, actually. And so loneliness was the thing that I remember the most, people feeling vulnerable.
And can you tell us a bit more? I mean, how long did this period last? How long did the efforts by the consulate and yourself last in terms of dealing with the loneliness and the other responses?
Well, it's gone on for 20 years now, actually, because we formed YAPA after that, which is Young Australian Professionals in America, really to look after the younger people who'd come to, well, in New York initially, to better their careers, and that's turned out obviously to be advanced. So I think you recognize the fact that Australians who live overseas at all times miss their own country. But in moments like this, with COVID, with September 11, Australians feel very, very, very vulnerable and feel like that they want to be home because that's a safer place to be. We live in a wonderful country, and people overseas who are over there for other reasons, enjoying themselves at their time, always miss Australia, without exception. I find that it's a pervading feeling. About there was 1 million Australians working overseas. There's much less now because I think 300,000, even more maybe, have come back home.
Sure.
But yeah, it continues today. But in terms of your specific question, I think it went on right through the period of my presence in New York. It was always the focus that we had of bringing young Australians in particular together to give them, mentoring amongst themselves. I'm a great believer in peer mentoring, where a person of your own age who's had a year in New York can tell you where to get your apartment, perhaps who to see, make you feel comfortable. So it went on for some time, but in the first 24 hours, Jill and I went out into the streets, actually, went down to as close as we could get to the impacted area to have a look. It was covered with white dust. There was this horrible peachy smell. And we came back then, and by that time, the staff had got together and formed what we called the disaster center at that point in time, reporting back to Australia, taking calls from people in Australia concerned about their relatives. And it was interesting. One of the decisions that we made is to say that the consulate was here to say yes, not to say no. The consulate was here to help. And if you have a problem, tell us about it and we'll do what we can. Come around and see us. And we manned the telephones 24 hours a day. So instead of having two telephone systems, one going into the consulate, one going into the embassy, we brought them together and manned it 24 hours a day. So people who felt vulnerable could ring us and get a human voice. And it's amazing. Once they'd spoken to us, sometimes we didn't hear from them again. On the other hand, the people who, as example, the Reserve Bank, who were in the old black building that I used to work in, actually alongside the Twin Towers, had come in and, they had left their offices with people falling around them and come into the offices, and we made couches up for them. We made beds up for them. They rested before they went back into their own homes, before they could get home, actually. So the consulate was really a war zone in many, many ways. And Jill and I, as time went by and we were let further into the area, we had to do some very personal things for the people that had been affected by September 11 in a very direct sort of way, as the police and others asked us to do certain things so that we could identify certain people.
Tell me a bit about the flag. I think one of the first responder groups, someone found an Australian flag. Could you tell me a bit about what happened with that?
That did. We developed a very, very close association with the police and the fire department. In fact, very, very personal. And, one of the things that we did do was to send a whole group of fire officers down to Australia to thank them very much for what they'd done for us. And, in the process of cleaning up, and I can't tell you that the job of cleaning up, inch by inch, downtown New York was just one of the most amazing feats of all time. And in one of the buildings close by, an Australian flag was found buried in debris. And a police officer rang me and said, Ken, we found this flag. I think it's a very meaningful thing. It's one of the few things that we did find that was directly associated with Australia. And he brought it in. We had a very solemn and serious ceremony, you know, remembering the names of the people that were affected. And I decided that the best place for the flag was in Australia. And we sent that back to the National Museum. And they've honoured and treasured that flag as a symbol of the disaster that affected so many people around the world, not only Australians.
No, of course. You'll be interested to know that the museum has agreed to send the flag back here for a month or so over the 20-year celebration, or celebration, not the right word, of course, the 20-year commemoration. And so we're going to actually have a simple ceremony here. We're going to give people the opportunity to come by and pay their respects with that flag, the flag you were given, as sort of the centerpiece of our small way of giving Australians who are still here the opportunity to reflect on, you know, what happened in 9/11. So that flag is still being almost a vital part of recognising the loss that Australians suffered, and the fact that we still think back not only on the people who lost their lives, some 10 Australians, but also on the impact it's had on, well, the whole world, and certainly on Australia since that day. So I'm sure the person who presented you with the flag would be pleased to know that it is still sort of actively being respected by Australians.
That's a wonderful thing, Nick, because they took it very, very seriously. They took their friendship with Australia very, very seriously. And I think it's a very appropriate thing that that flag comes back to New York for a period of time, and you know, people reflect on the 10 people that died that day.
Right. Is there anything else that I haven't asked you about, or any other recollection you'd like to give us?
I think the one very sustaining thought that I have, Nicholas, is the way that people came together at all levels in New York. The families of the people that died on that day, they were just amazing Australians, every single one of them. And in tragedy, great strength comes from it. And you know, I should remind you, you probably already know, but we put together a visitor's book after September 11, and you know, Hillary Clinton, Giuliani, so many people came around just to pay their respects to Australia. And I think when the world comes together, everything is possible. And sometimes out of tragedy, out of the ashes of something like September 11, you know, things like Advance, for instance, come out of that. Yeah, things like...
if I might say so that you don't have to say so, it was a great achievement setting up Advance, which continues to do a real practical job for the Australian diaspora. So you're right, things do come out of it. And this time, the 20-year commemoration, of course, is near Leaders' Week at the UN, which is sort of the following week. And it's also near the 70th anniversary of ANZUS. So there are a lot of Australian American things that are not of happy nature when they occur, but in terms of their effect on people's thoughts and the relationship between countries, they've had a very profound impact.
And may I say, Nick, that I think Australia should be very, very proud that you're there in New York at this time. I think that your presence there reminds Americans that Australia is a great, great friend. And I know that you've reached out to lots of areas within the American and Australian presence. And thank you for doing the job that you're doing.